Over the past 4 months, I've learned a lot about the inner workings of anti-oppressive research and allyship. We've unpacked and analyzed the different facets of being anti-oppressive in our research, the historical and ontological origins of anti-oppressive research and indigenous knowledge, and ultimately concluded the fluidity of allyship. But what does it mean to be an ally? You probably know that it involves fighting for a marginalized group that you're not a part of. But do you know the difference between being a passive ally and a proactive one? Being an ally is more than a label or identity of its own. It's a rigorous and arduous process that involves constant learning and unlearning of our privilege in hopes of providing solidarity to those marginalized groups we seek to help, but not speaking over their voices at the same time. It's a lifelong process that involves continuous commitment to marginalized individuals and accountability of our own actions. It's not just a label we can slap on ourselves and call it a job well done. Allyship is defined by the people we seek to support, and our work must be recognized by those we want to ally ourselves with, or else it doesn't have the same kind of impact. So, with that in mind, I've compiled a list of 5 ways to be a good ally, whether in your role as a future anti-oppressive researcher or in your everyday life. And it's also why I'm going to roll up my sleeves now so I can pretend that I know things, even when I don't. Counting down from number 5 is knowing yourself. To understand, empathize, and hold yourself in solidarity with marginalized communities is a practice that can only come once you know yourself. To be able to decolonize oneself and understand our positionality is critical on our journeys to being the best allies we can be. Knowing yourself and where you stand in social hierarchies and systems of power in comparison to others is critical when attempting to unlearn and dismantle those very systems. It's also through this process of knowing ourselves and holding ourselves accountable that we can understand our own biases and perceptions that have resulted from our own socialization. Positionality can go hand in hand with intersectionality, a feminist framework designed by Black feminist scholar Kimberly Crenshaw. It reflects the notion that gender identity, race, class, sexuality, ability, and other facets of our identity are markers of relational positions rather than essential qualities. Our knowledge and understanding of our experiences isn't valuable in a vacuum. Rather, understanding the constantly shifting contextual factors of our lives is crucial when we try to define our identities and our ways of knowing. Number 4 on this list is knowing other people. Whether they're the participants in the research projects you conduct or people you interact with in everyday life, understanding their positionality is just as important as understanding our own. To know other people is to look beyond surface-level understandings of any similarities or differences you may have. It's the responsibility of an ally to minimize the negative effects that come with appropriations of cultures, microaggressions, and stereotypes. It's also the role of the ally, not the marginalized community, to mitigate and minimize the negative effects of relationships insider populations might have with outsider ones. To know other people is to shift your focus beyond buzzwords like multiculturalism or diversity and the "they're just like us" mentality. Allyship requires an in-depth understanding of our differences and shifts closer to a difference-centered approach, like we discussed in class. The concept of bridging versus bonding is really important here because we can move beyond more simplistic ways to form relationships and bonds with marginalized communities like those rooted in our similarities and shift to a way of thinking that asks us to connect with people in conjunction with the things that set us apart. Part of being an ally is navigating the continuous conflict of finding people who are willing to educate people who aren't members of the marginalized community while also ensuring that you avoid placing onus on these communities to be the only ones doing the teaching. Number 3 is knowing how to reframe your relationship. Although the notion of building relationships with marginalized communities you seek to ally yourselves with may be an obvious one, it's as complex a process as knowing yourself and knowing others can be. It's not just the building of the relationship that's important, but how you build it and how you maintain it going forward. It requires an ontological and epistemological shift. It's critical to understand the different ways in which people know and learn things, which can sound kind of paradoxical in a sense, but stay with me for a second. The purpose of anti-oppressive research and leading an anti-oppressive existence involves critically examining the inherent power imbalances and understanding that there isn't a right way to be. In that respect, there's also not a right way to be an anti-oppressive researcher. The most important thing when it comes to reframing your relationship is knowing that when solidarity acts in isolation of the communities it seeks to help, it lacks the most critical component of allyship: accountability. It should be said that if you choose to pursue anti-oppressive research, you're probably going to screw up a lot. It's important that you're prepared for that, but also that you're prepared to listen and apologize to those you've hurt, and work hard to be accountable to them and be different going forward. Number 2 on this list is knowing that the work is never done. As I mentioned in the beginning of this video, ally isn't an identity. As scholars before me have put in far more articulate terms, an ally isn't a noun, it's a verb. It's important to recognize that allyship involves constant work and constant commitment. It's not good enough just to do one act of good and assume you'll forever have the title of ally added to your resume going forward. Fighting oppressive systems of power is a continuous, day-to-day struggle, and it doesn't necessarily have an end goal in sight. It's important to recognize that members of marginalized communities, those who experience racism, misogyny, transphobia, ableism, and more, are exhausted. Just saying that you're an ally is not, nor will it ever be, enough. The role of an ally is one that's rooted in plurality. Allies have important roles to play in supporting members of marginalized communities, but also to dismantle systems of power where the marginalized cannot. To educate members of oppressor groups is not a challenge that the oppressed can tackle on their own. It's important that allies help mitigate these conflicts, but only when they're asked, and not when they're taking up the spaces that marginalized folk need. Number 1 is ultimately knowing that following the 4 aforementioned steps don't make you an amazing person, just a decent one. Miracles don't happen right away, and the goal of an ally shouldn't be to fix all the world's problems in one day. That's a daunting and ultimately impossible challenge. To be able to recognize the inherent flaws in the systems that govern our lives doesn't make you worthy of reward. Rather, it makes you a decent human being. It's important not to expect praise for supporting marginalized communities, because that makes the anti-oppressive work about you and not the community. Thank you for watching this video. I've got a list of all the resources that have been really helpful for me during this tumultuous process of finding my own allyship, and other citations listed at the end. Bye! And what are your thoughts on allyship? Anything to report? Nothing? Great.